Hey, I just sent you the link again. I think I figured it out.
Oh, okay. Let me log into
I think it's the same link, but
that. Oh, it is? It's
okay.
asking me to register again.
How do you feel about me opening the meeting? Because I think people are on it. And then when you come on, is that okay?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. I'm going to do, oh, I see you.
Okay, I'm already there.
I see you. Okay, I'm going to open it right away and you'll hear me talking. You can try to share your screen, but I want to tell them that we're having it.
Great, sounds good. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to hang up Skype.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's do it. Okay, 1, 2, 3, we're on. Oh, why isn't that working? Please. Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Huh,
I see people joining.
you do? Okay.
It says, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 folks
7.
joining.
Yep,
7. Yeah.
great.
Maybe it's just muted for the participants.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear us? Oh,
I think they're raising hands, so.
Yep, they must be muted. Hi, everybody. I think we'll just go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for bearing with us with the technical difficulties. Allow me first to just introduce myself. I'm Julie Marie Vanderberg, and I'm quite new with PQMD. This is the first time I've hosted one of these webinars. I come aboard as the Senior Director of Global Health, and I'm very happy to be here, and along with Elizabeth Ashburn, our Executive Director, and Jen Zokos, the Director of the PQMD Community of Practice. We wanted to welcome you to the Pillar Talks Community of Practice webinar series. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. So I just wanted to quickly go over what PQMD does for those of you who may not be aware. We are a global alliance that is committed to advancing the role of donations worldwide, with 42 members representing the leading international and US-based NGOs and global healthcare companies in pharmaceuticals, medical products, and devices. We were founded in 1999, and our work is guided by 5 pillars. We work on humanitarian assistance, health system strengthening, disaster response, guidelines and standards, and knowledge and innovation. By virtue of our network, our members leverage their participation and their partnerships, expertise, and resources to focus on building sustainability, promoting community resilience, supporting disaster preparedness and response capacities, all while adhering to the highest standards in donation practices. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today. So today's, as you can see on the screen, today's event will focus on blockchain technology. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is and how it's being used in international development. We're also going to stretch a little to co-imagine maybe how it could be used within the medical GIK sector. We're very lucky to have with us today Dr. Valentine Gandhi. Dr. Gandhi started his career as a software developer. He moved into development 19 years ago when he had a chance meeting with a migrant worker and seeing his family's plight. And then he went on to do his master's and his PhD in economics, focusing on migration, HIV and AIDS, and livelihoods, starting with the first job at the World Bank in DC, and then he moved to UNU wider in Helsinki, UNDP Kenya, worked at USAID in Zambia, Somalia, and then IWMI in Ethiopia, and then on to USAID, back to Zambia again. He moved to Southeast Asia in November of 2016. Since then, he's been mostly independent consulting and working with a number of donors, including DFAT, the European Union, GIZ, and USAID as an M&E and MIS advisor He's a team leader for evaluation and ICT4D expert in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand. He's currently based in between Nairobi and Jakarta. He's worked in over 60 countries in various capacities, including in conflict zones such as Somalia and Afghanistan. He mostly works on livelihoods, climate change, gender, health, and tech for good projects. In 2001, he founded the Dev Cafe, which is a think tank based in Kenya, Zambia, Canada, and most recently in Indonesia. It works on R4D, innovation and capacity building, and does multiple projects, including developing apps, drone mapping, smart sensors, and blockchain, among others, which we also wanted to let you know that he's going to be in DC from the 3rd to the 10th of September coming up here. So if you like what you hear here and you'd like to have an opportunity to meet up with him, he would be open to potential meetings or collaborations. So therefore, before diving in, I just wanted to review quickly some housekeeping rules. It doesn't seem like the first one's a problem. It's asking for us to keep everybody on mute. I will try to unmute you when we're doing the Q&A session. Please know that this session is being recorded. We'd like to share it with other members of the community of practice who didn't have the opportunity to be here with us today. The webinar we expect to last about 40 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes, and then followed by some questions and answers. You can post questions anytime, and I can either read them at the end or you can read them yourselves. And for follow-up to this webinar and any other discussions, please be sure to join us at the Community of Practice. It's cop.pqmd.org. So we can't wait to hear your feedback and ideas related to blockchain. Now, without further delay, we're in for a treat. Sit back and enjoy. Dr. Gandhi, please, can you share your experiences with us?
Thank you so much for that, Jen. Appreciate this opportunity to speak to your community of practice. And thank you for the introduction to me as well as to Development Cafe. And as Jen mentioned, Dev Cafe is a think tank. Its headquarters is in Nairobi, and we primarily do research for development, innovation, and capacity building, largely on projects on using technology for agriculture, for health, for livelihoods, for refugees, and so on and so forth. So we are not a tech company, but we test technologies right from smart sensors or IoTs, and to see its feasibility on the user from a user-focused approach, because generally technologies tend to, or tech companies tend to have a solution or have a hammer and look for nails, but at least because in the context of development work is we deal with people who are vulnerable and the lack of lack safety nets. We need to really design solutions around the problem. And part of why I do seminars like this is to build awareness with the users, whether it's in health sector or livelihoods or agriculture, to see if they can design technologies around whatever issues that they work on. And as I mentioned, the work that we do in the development sector or human development sector is often, it's not about what color dress I'm going to wear tomorrow or what am I going to do Monday. Sometimes it's a question of life and death, or putting food for your family can be a big challenge. And most often, many of the folks that we work with are living in marginalized zones in all senses, both in terms of the agro ecosystems as well as the infrastructure and sometimes even institutional problems such as caste or traditional disadvantages. And so working with them, whatever technologies or not, we need to be extra cautious. And that's why we've always seen that the technologies that we introduce can either bridge grassroots with policy or bridge solutions with the resources and with people who need them, or it can be a big barrier that puts them in a worse situation than they were before an intervention. And ICT4D, or information and communication technologies for development, of which blockchain and IoTs are part of this group, can be, depending on how we use it, can really be a voice for the voiceless and can be a wall in terms of bridging the divide. And that's why, first of all, we need to understand the technologies and then we know our users better, and then we try to match them. So hopefully this webinar will give you an idea of what blockchain is and some of the projects that we are working on, and maybe motivate your community of practice to start thinking about whether or not it's the right technology for you to apply. Um, so to go straight to the topic, blockchain is a digital ledger, which is a secure, shared, and distributed ledger. Ledgers are not new. They've been as old as civilization themselves. Ancient Sumeria had ledgers of transactions on lands, transactions on finances, what owes people, and then it evolved over time and until we got digital ledgers. Uh, the 2008 financial crisis was where people started rethinking on how to solve problems like this. At this time, a person or a group of people called Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a white paper based on some work done by a few others in 1992. He or she or them, they wrote this paper where they introduced this idea of Bitcoin, which is this digital currency that can be used as a commodity, as a value. And that particular Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, as it is known as, sat inside the blockchain platform, which is this digital ledger. What is this, in simple words, is internet is to information, is what blockchain is to value. What I mean by that is, let's say if two people are deciding to bet on a city's weather, Jakarta or San Francisco or DC, and then say tomorrow it's going to be rainy or sunny, and we'll say, okay, if it's rainy, I'm going to give you $50, and you're going to give me another 50, and then we can trust each other to pay if you're friends or even colleagues, or we can turn it into a contract. And of course, we're not going to have a contract for $50. I'm just using it as an illustration. Or we could ask some of our colleagues or somebody neutral to yeah, give our $50 to them, and then say, you give it to us depending on what it is tomorrow, if it's rainy or sunny. But both trust and contract, I mean, historically we've known, are not always optimal, because we can't trust strangers, and or in some cases people don't keep up to their promises, and so on and so forth. But in terms of blockchain, why it's suddenly become so popular is you don't need a trusted central authority where you just write a code into the blockchain to which both of the parties that are laying a bet send $50. And then this program, the digital ledger, will keep this $100 and measure the weather through the IoT, which I'll talk about a little bit, which is the Internet of Things, and then distribute the money accordingly based on who won. And even if it was rainy and sunny on the same day, sometimes happens, then it distributes equally. So, but for a $50 bet, it doesn't seem like you need to go through the effort of having a distributed ledger or a centralized, decentralized authority. But imagine if you're moving million tons of cash in conflict zones or in disaster areas, and if you automate this process without having to rely on brokers or middlemen, then especially in the development sector or even financial sector, this becomes extremely useful. So essentially, blockchain has brought in this new model for record keeping, because that's what ledgers do. It keeps records of transactions, financial or assets or otherwise. Traditionally, there is a central authority like a bank or a service provider who gives access to, who holds the land records or financial records, or your bank balance, or taxation records. And then all of us rely on that central authority to function efficiently, to ensure that our transactions are smooth, or and we pay a fee for that. But in terms of blockchain, there is no central authority. So if I were to use, let's say, a village, for example, and there are pieces of land or parcels of land that are owned by several people, and then the local village headman or the village authority keeps a record of who owns what. In some cases, in areas where we work, quite often the person or persons involved in that central authority can be easily influenced by what is known as the local elite, especially in countries like Africa or in India. Then they can change the land ownership documents, and there's constantly fights, and you keep hearing of farmers committing suicides because their land was taken by the land mafia or by someone who's elite, and or fake documents produced and so on and so forth. So it's easy to fudge if there's a or manipulate a central authority, or it can be super very expensive to keep them in good books. But imagine in the same village, no one has that access to that, but rather everybody else, no central authority has an access to it, but everyone has access to who owns what, and no one can change it unless everybody has a consensus on whether or not to change it. So, supposing if I sell 2 acres of land to Jen, and everybody has to update their records and then agree that yes, this land has been sold, only then that record keeps updating. And in a blockchain, these records can only be added on. So, which means the old record still remains. In a traditional database, we have what is called the CRUD commands. I don't want to be too technical here, but in general, any traditional database, you all might be using at least Excel or any sort of databases. You can create a record, you can read your record, you can update your record, and you can delete your record, which is very standard for any database or Excel sheet that you might use. But in a blockchain, you can only add on to it. You cannot delete it. It's a permanent, immutable record. You cannot alter your old record. You can only add to it, which gives sort of a provenance of where things come from, especially if you're tracking things that need to be tracked to ensure that it doesn't fall in the evil in illegal means. So that's why it's a fantastic model, and it reduces cost because it completely eliminates the intermediaries, and it increases revenue because this blockchain as a technology has opened up a lot more opportunities for technologies that were specifically used only by a set of people, by like IoT sensors, Internet of Things sensors, and AI and machine learning. Now, more and more, you can see everywhere data sciences positions and are opening up. So there is new products and services are opening, and there is no single point of failure as in a traditional database. In traditional databases, electricity could fail, so the data can be fudged, or there could be a disaster and things like that. And if you lose it, even in the cloud, it can be destroyed. But blockchain, for instance, it's a mega network of blocks stored in a form of a chain. So it's always on because there's no single point where it can be, unless every single computer in the world is destroyed. It's going to continue to be. And then it increases speed and transparency because it verifies where and what the previous transaction is from and where did it originate. I'll talk a little bit in detail about some case studies where how this is so useful in maintaining this provenance and audit trail. And then, of course, as I just mentioned, it's a write-only database that preserves a unchangeable or immutable record of all the transactions that's happened here. And it is completely decentralized as opposed to having central authority, and it's cryptographically secure. Even though it's possible that anybody can see anybody's transactions, but it's not like someone's name is listed. You still need to share your private key in order to have a transaction with someone. So it's out there, doesn't mean everybody has access to it. It's it's hashed into cryptographically secure transactions. So anybody undertaking a transaction can see who is sending what and what is being sent. And the advantages are you can have real-time data across participants and how useful it is, and it's completely automatable. And especially in the development sector where we rely so much on infrastructure costs and intermediaries, it really simplifies whatever work we do. And I think it'll be more clear to you when I show you in the coming slides how we use it in different areas. But why so much emphasis on decentralization? Because, as I mentioned before, technology often tends to be as much as a wall as it is a bridge, or it can be very divisive if certain people have no access to it, or if certain communities are not aware of it. And that can cause people to be further down the poverty line or further down disadvantages. But because blockchain has access to anybody with a smartphone or a simple phone to log in, and it is decentralized where you don't have specific administrative privilege to be part of a blockchain anyone can log in either in a public blockchain or a private blockchain. It is certainly inclusive in nature because there's a lot of collaboration that occurs and everyone is equal, and it's purely used for transaction purposes. And it is robust, as I mentioned. It cannot malfunction or natural disaster because it's kind of all permeable ledger. And nobody can censor it because what's in the blockchain is there permanently, so nobody can block it because there's multiple ways to access a blockchain. And so, and it's egalitarian. I mean, there's no political boundaries or geographic discrimination, no monopoly. You can just log into, let's say, Coinbase or any other website and just create your wallet and start buying things or start transacting or transmitting. Or you can create your own application, which is called DApp, which is a decentralized application to access the blockchain specifically for your groups or your peers. That's called a private blockchain. Why is this blockchain suddenly a hype, and what is so innovative about it? Traditionally, computers are very good in copying information, so which means you can't create unique values digitally. But blockchain changed that attitude. I mean, changed that technical aspect and made uniqueness possible in the digital world or in the virtual world. In other words, it created what is called digital scarcity. So each block is unique. Each value, each token, each crypto, Bitcoin, or whatever transaction that you wish to use in a blockchain is unique. Even though cryptocurrencies are generally used as in common term, you can't really compare it to the actual currency, because you may have seen that many people are issuing ICOs now. That is the interim initial coin offering, very similar to the initial public offering in traditional companies. Uh, each of them have their own coin and they treat it. So which means each of them, their values are native to that particular application. It cannot be exchanged. It cannot be compared with the real world material or physical assets. It's that group which agrees that this is the attributable value to a particular token, a particular currency, and then they pay for that. So that has become very unique because within this sphere of technology or virtual world, more and more we are so much digital, and now with the machine learning and AI, having something that creates a unique asset value or a native asset value is a groundbreaking revolution, because that kind of replaces our traditional ways of owning. That's why these are called digital assets or bit currencies and virtual currencies and so on. So that is what makes it extremely unique. And because technology, because of the ease in which transactions happen, and the near real-time transfer of funds, it literally cuts the minimal the costs involved in transactions. All of us own bank accounts and credit cards, and to hold our money, banks charge, and that's what happens. And sometimes it's huge fees that we have to incur. But in a blockchain, the fees are minimal, even if you're transacting in millions, and that makes it very easy, especially for development companies or UN to transfer money to refugees, for instance, in bulk, and that's near real time. So that's another thing that is so useful when we use a blockchain. Just to have a little bit of what a blockchain consists of. Any blockchain, a real blockchain, because there's a lot of them out there who are pushing for regular databases and claiming it to be blockchain. But a real blockchain will have the ability of multiple collaborators to make adds to the blockchain. Multiple writers or multiple collaborators who can add. This is anybody. All of us listening in can just go into any of these sites and start creating wallets and start transacting. And it's a write-only design. That means you cannot delete what you put in there. You can add to it, but your old record, even if you made an error to it, will remain as that. And the hosting of the blockchain is usually in a decentralized peer-to-peer network. It's basically nothing but a barrage of computers interconnected with each other. And then a consensus mechanism. There are multiple consensus mechanisms on, I gave you the example of the villages where people have a consensus before they determine whether I sold the land to Jen or not. That consensus has multiple. The commonly used are proof of work and proof of stake, meaning how quickly did a particular computer solve the problem, a mathematical problem that can uh, show which block does this particular transaction fit into the larger blockchain. That computer can that's how you get the consensus. Or proof of stake is usually used in cryptocurrency, where the number or the larger coins you hold, you have a higher consensus power. So unless all of this is agreed upon, and then there's a list of consensus depending on whether your blockchain is a private one or a public one. And then an incentive structure integrated into blockchain software that ensures that the nodes maintaining it work together. In some cases, when if you're a miner are people who run the blockchain and keep the computers on and do the sort of a maintain the database. They earn in bitcoins. But if you set up a private blockchain, like I would show you an example, so you could set up your own token system, own incentive for your participants to be part of the blockchain. And then, of course, the use of cryptography to ensure the security, integrity, and reliability of the information is recorded in the blockchain and the systems which manage it. If you have any queries specifically on this, I'm happy to discuss as soon as I finish talking. This is a very crude but simple diagram that can help you decide if you have a project that you think could use blockchain, especially if you're listening in and from the health sector. At least in all the documented blockchain projects worldwide at the moment, 25% of them are in health, simply because of the nature of blockchain, where it functions as an efficient database and ledger system uh, to be able to be shared by multiple, closely followed by the finance sector. But health remains number one in terms of the use case for blockchain. So you could ask questions like, do you need to store state, which is basically information about a particular transaction, and are there multiple writers? Yes. Can you always use an online trusted third party? And if you say you can use then all the time, then you don't need to use the blockchain. You can use a traditional database or a distributed database. One thing I should mention is blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, which means the ledgers are distributed on a wide network. But not all DLTs are, or not all distributed ledgers are blockchain. What I mean by that is there are some distributed ledgers which have a central authority. They would automatically not be a blockchain. But blockchain is a distributed ledger, but with no central authority. And if you know all the writers in your network, then it is a permissionless blockchain. So the top horizontal line, which leads up to permission blockchain, is where a Bitcoin sits. Anybody can go log in, transfer to anyone, and set up a wallet and keep paying each other. But if you know the writers, then your next question would be, if you know, are they all trusted? If no, and then you can ask if it's require a public verifiability. Like for example, the World Bank launched last week a blockchain called blockchain bond for impact investment funds called Bundi. So that is a public permission block. I mean, it's open to the public. Public verification is required, but still, it is a permission within the sectors that the World Bank wishes to invest or to invite investors for their specific project funding. And then if there is no public verifiability required, where it's specifically for a project, then it's a private permission blockchain. Otherwise, you don't really need to use a blockchain in any of them. I know just looking at this, you may not get it straight away. And it took me, I mean, I started working with blockchain technology 2 years ago, and I'm not saying I can't say I'm an expert, but at least I can see how it works. So it's going to take you some time, but at least this is a very basic and a crude explanation of you can decide in your group, if supposing you have a project on health or project on migration or things, you can decide whether or not you can use this. How do we use it in international development? At the moment, DevCafe is involved in 4 projects which uses blockchain. One is called Project IAM, which is a project on using blockchain for refugees. And then we are proposing another project with the US government, USAID, on ocean to table tracking of fish value chain. And then Rice blockchain is where we incentivize farmers to adopt climate smart technology, and they are funded by or they're compensated within a blockchain. And Dhanadesa, which literally means village funds, is a proof of concept that we are currently developing. in Indonesia to efficiently manage village funds and village information systems. And I'll talk a little bit about it in a while. The others that I mean, I've advised or reviewed, but it's not something that I'm working on personally. But you can have a look on the website. Is the Fairchain Coffee in Ethiopia, which is a very popular blockchain application, especially for coffee value chain, and it's really benefiting the coffee farmers to directly get funded and cuts out the middlemen or middlewomen. And then the World Food Programme's refugee is where the WFP piloted in Jordan, where they were able to transact a monthly fee that is sent to the refugees in a very smooth and efficient way. And if you'd like to see around 280 projects, which includes the ones that are listed here, are in this master list. I'm sure Jen or Julie would share this PowerPoint with you. And then you can look at all the types of interventions and the stages they are in, and also the sectors they are in. Looking specifically at the projects, blockchain IAM project is very simple because refugees, as you know, they flee persecution, either war or disaster. And there are two kinds of countries. One that have signed the 1951 refugee accords, which enables them to receive refugees who are fleeing from life-threatening situations, and then the others which are not signatories. Sometimes they're not signatories because many of the countries were newly independent at the time of those accords, and they didn't have enough infrastructure to host refugees, and that's why many of them didn't sign. But nevertheless, these are countries that still host refugees out of humanitarian needs. And Indonesia is one of them, even though Indonesia is not a recipient country, but more of a transition country. There are around 14 to 15,000 refugees stuck in Indonesia in a limbo for nearly 5 to 7 years. And so what we did, or what DevCafe is doing, is we tried to partner with some people who create a debit card based on a blockchain in Finland. And then at that time, we got this idea, let's try and do the same project here. What it does is we do a research basically on a gap assessment of if the refugees that are stuck here in Indonesia have interest in using or learning IT skills. It can be anything as simple as Google search engine jobs, or it can be an advanced coding. But we found a range of interests and skills, because you might have heard of this term called digital nomads, where young folks or sometimes even mid-career folks quit their jobs and go work in an island in Bali or in Mombasa in Kenya, and they will be sitting with a laptop and doing work online and pretty much living their lives as they would like. These are called digital nomads. In this case, we thought we could apply that concept to refugees by training them, because most refugee centers that function in Indonesia either function as a learning center where they teach English or mathematics, and or function as a counseling center or a relief center which gives them medical aid. But we wanted to really empower them, because DevCafe doesn't do a charity-based model, but more development model, meaning we don't treat people who we work with, no matter how marginable they are, as a handout receivers, but rather partners in their own development. And so we wanted to, and we often found, or at least in the 20 years of research experience, I find that people sometimes just need one gap to be filled for them to empower themselves. And that's the difference between development, relief, and charity, because relief and charity is emergency aid where you need to do those things, but development looks at the longer value chain of building sustenance. It's not often feel good as humanitarian or relief work is, where you don't go and in the thick of things. It always happens in the background, systematically through research and trial and error. So Project IAM is an R4D project, or Research for Development project. So we are now in the phase of, first we've identified the gap, and now we're doing the research. Where does blockchain come in here? Most of the refugees, or all of the refugees in Indonesia, have no identity. The project is called IAM because the fact that they are in Earth and right in front of us means they are there, and they have the right to be loved and to work and to marry or to enjoy and have all the happiness and sadnesses in life as every other human being right next to them. because we live in one planet, and calling someone a refugee is, I at least for personally, I find it ridiculous because of these borders and all that. But that's the way it is, and so as a result of that, they have no identity. So what this blockchain platform we are developing would enable them to do is, once they have gotten the training, which is happening now, they would be able to register in the blockchain, create their own identity without having to register their biometrics or names, but just create a wallet and look for jobs in sites, which we are also assisting in sites like Upwork or Freelancer. And in some cases, we have directly spoken with IT companies that can give micro jobs and connect them, and they pay them to e-wallets within the blockchains. The whole process is automated. Whenever this company posts a job that is there, it sends them a message, and then they log into the chain, and they get paid after they finish their work. Blockchains have another important factor called smart contracts. Smart contracts is a digital version. I mean, it wouldn't say exactly an escrow, but it's a transaction can move in a block only when certain conditions are met. So it's an algorithm or a digital code that enables A to send money to B, or A to send digital assets to B, only if the smart contract agrees to that. So they would be in the blockchain. The refugees would sign a smart contract with the companies that are hiring them as interns or as employees, and that's the idea. At the moment, we are in the stage of training, and we are in the stage of developing blockchain. And because we are a self-funded agency, we do not have a lot of funds for it, but we hope this can become a global phenomena. And we are also building a co-working space exclusively for refugees. There are tons of co-working space around the world, but this is a place where they could come and do their digital jobs and get paid for it as well. And if you'd like to support this project or know more about it, you can get in touch with us regularly. And then the Ocean to Table Senegal project is, if you know about Senegal, its government exchequer loses around 300 to 400 million dollars a year because of illegal fishing, even though it has a rich ocean fishing table, and that causes a lot of problems to the local market, the local economy, especially with a country like Senegal. So this project is where each time a fish is caught, it is tagged. If you know RFID, which is this geotag in a fish, which is the size of a postage stamp, and it's even probably lighter than that. So each time a fish is caught, and it costs like less than a cent or something if you buy it in bulk, and then it's tagged, and then until the time it is delivered to a customer's house on a table, you can track the provenance of a fish. I mean, so what? It can be the next question, but in a case where millions of fish is lost and millions of dollars is lost, automating this process of each time a fish is caught in the waters of Senegal and it's tagged until it reaches where it's supposed to reach, which is the consumer, and it's paid for legally within the legal channels, then it is a really a question of automating this process. Why it's important to automate this process instead of tagging it and manually writing it? We all know, because human beings, if you ask them to do something, sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't do it. And even in a blockchain, for example, this particular rice that I'm going to talk about, I'll show you some examples on why we had to use IoT sensors. But essentially, this is how it is being used. The sensors continuously transmit data about time and location of the fish, right from its time it's caught, then in the truck, and then it's loaded and it's sold in the market, and then it's sealed until it comes to the home where there's an instruction to remove the RFID, and until that time, the fish rightfully is paid for by the right person and stays within the local economy. And this one also, which I'm pretty excited about, is a blockchain solution for smallholder farmers to get smart contracts. Again, it's in the pilot test stages because this can be enormous. There are close to 144 million rice farmers, and we are planning to test it with a million of them. There is a CGIR, or a consultative group on international agricultural research, is a global body of agricultural research stations, and one of them is called IRI, International Rice Research Institute. Along with the United Nations Environment Program and a couple of others, they have set up something called the Sustainable Rice Platform, which is nothing but a set of indicators that you need to do or follow if you're a rice farmer to ensure there is a greater yield and your land or your farm is sustainable. For instance, you if your soil moisture is low, you need to add water to your soil. But if your soil moisture is high, you don't need to water. But farmers sometimes they do it out of habit, even when there is a lot of soil moisture, and this leads to soil erosion and depletion of soil and also water resources. So what we have done is we created smart watches in the which is a very small and it's a very cheap innovation, and also a smart sensor in the farmer's field. Each time the soil moisture is less, it sends a signal to the farmer and beeps in this person's phone and I mean the watch, and then they go and water the soil. When they do that, that action is recorded in the blockchain, and they earn a token credit which they can exchange from a local kiosk or a 7-Eleven that we have included in this project. Uh, what it does is it promotes better farm practice behaviors while giving the farmers an incentive to do what they should be doing anyway, which is practicing climate smart agriculture, particularly in these marginalized lands. Climate change can wreak havoc in their fields and cause drought and famine. And majority of these, especially this is being piloted in Mekong Valley, and they are all dependent on agriculture as the primary source of income. So in this case, the whole process is automated, and that is human beings, as I said, can manually say that I went and watered the plant, even if I didn't actually go and do it and still earn credit. But when in a blockchain, because it's directly connected to an Internet of Things sensor, you can't fake it, and it automates. Even if subjectively the farmer would decide not to do it, then they don't earn it. And that's why it's important that a blockchain by itself can only function with efficient automation like the IoTs and also other machine learning and AI tools. By itself is simply a database reliant on human beings, but paired with these smart sensors like IoT systems, it becomes a powerful tool. And then the Dana Desa pilot is another thing. Every year, every 5 years, the Indonesian government allocates millions of dollars to their villages for the village fund, village development, village social safety net, social protection unit, and so on and so forth. Um, but it's disproportionate, underutilized. There is no way to track the funds on whether or not it's reaching the right people. So what we're proposing to do, this is a very pilot stage. We're not sure if it will take off, depending on the political will, as is true in many countries, is to put a particular village fund in a select set of villages in a blockchain, and then determine right from the provenance. Let's say Ministry of Finance decides to send money for a women's empowerment program in rural Indonesia. So we track the fund provenance until the time it reaches the person that it is supposed to reach. And if you eliminate the central authority and ensure the ministry, the women's groups, the middle local government authorities, the NGOs are all part of that peer group, equally looking at the blockchain on where the fund is transferred, who it is allocated to, it completely legitimizes and transparent makes the process transparent. Again, like I said, such a thing is revolutionary to ensure. Long time ago, there was an Indian prime minister called Rajiv Gandhi who was assassinated long time ago. But he said something when he became prime minister. I see for every single rupee that is being spent for the poor, only 10 paise, which is 1/10 of a rupee, reaches the poor. What happens to the 90 paise? Nobody knows, or the 90 units. So this can actually enable to ensure that the entire rupee or entire dollar goes to where it should be going. So this is again a pilot. As I said, blockchain by its nature is or needs to be associated with innovations such as big data and IoTs. Right? Otherwise, as human beings, we tend to fudge data. In health and life sciences, as I said, it's majority of the projects that are active in blockchain now or actively using. There are a lot of what I've seen in the workshops and conferences that I keep going to or talking or collaborating with. these snake oil salespeople who come and push everything under the blockchain and show it as if it's the, I don't know, second coming of Christ and it's the solution to all problems, and they keep pushing for it. But again, health is legitimately a area where you can use. For instance, in Lombok, Lombok is an island in Indonesia, a very beautiful island. It's a highly visited tourist spot, but it constantly has earthquakes and tsunamis. The last tsunami, a lot of primary health centers were literally destroyed to the core. And many of the children in that region are undernourished, and the stunting data and under five children's data were in those primary health centers. So there's no way to track the patients, because unlike in the cities, or if some of us were who have kids, or we just take our kids to the hospital, or we know how to follow up with doctors. But the marginalized and poor, unless these midwives and doctors come and call them, because they are busy spending for their livelihoods, because they live from stomach to plate on a daily basis. It's not like they have a plan to innovate, and they are daily wage laborers, and many of their children are undernourished. So they don't go unless the midwife or the hospital staff go and tell them or remind them that you need to go to the hospital. But when this data is lost, the folks don't know who's living where and how to track them, and that has been a disaster. But in this case, introducing a blockchain can completely automate the process, that no matter what disaster strikes, the data is still there. And then if you combine it with the smart sensors, you don't need to physically and manually go and knock on every door. The smart sensors can remind people or send an SMS automatically to tell them, hey, your child's checkup is due, or this vaccination is due, so you need to go for it. And of course, product supply requests, and many of you in PQMD donate. I noticed even on the PQMD website, you were helping with the Indonesia recent earthquake, and things like this, where you want to track the provenance of what you sent, whether it's reached or not, and what is happening as a result of that. And you can also set smart contracts to say that if you wanted 50 people benefited from a single donation, only then the next batch of your funds can release. So things like that, you can set it up into a blockchain, and digital patient records. So I live in an urban city, and I go for a general health checkup to a particular hospital, and then I recently had an appendix operation to another one, because the specialty is there. They both, this is a real story, both of these hospitals belong to the same group. However, I had to re-register in both places, and it's expensive, and also I have to go through the same test that I just concluded in the other hospital, which is basically their own chain. But if you have this in the blockchain, there's one unit where they all speak to each other, and you can withhold the name, you can withhold the person who doesn't want to identify themselves, and simply give your blood test or blood group or whatever you decide to give in the blockchain. And that is one of the things. And then the transactional access, which I just talked about for low and middle income countries, and ease of product location from the site in a recall situation, where you know where it's gone, where you want to, especially when most of you are in medical donations, when there's a disaster stock or it's gone to the wrong place, then it's easy for you to locate. The advantage from a traditional database is this whole process is automated with sensors, and then there's an incentive built in it, and a measurement mechanism built into that. That's what makes this makes blockchain something that we could use. Like I said, for instance, there are these health and life sciences areas of interoperability, accessibility, privacy, security, healthcare, abuse, fraud, revenue leakage. All these are areas in which folks in healthcare can use them. And this is the user need, or the need of the industry. But then to enable that within a blockchain, you would need these IoTs, cloud and security and blockchain work together. And while the value chain process is ensured, you can also measure the outcomes on how fast it is reaching. For us in evaluation, like I'm primarily also an evaluator, I do large scale evaluations or country level, regional level evaluations of mega projects. And it's instantly real time. We can look at non-biased data of an intervention, whether it's in health or refugees, in a transparent way. And that's why it can be the center of technology that drives this value, efficiency, and trust in business transformation, not just in healthcare, but also in finances and development. And as I said a couple of times, the key message is blockchain or any technology can fall apart in practice depending on who uses it and how we use it. That's why, at least in this case, development folks are more eager to push the agenda rather than wait for technology companies to push the agenda. We've all seen how it works. And if you've seen Mark Zuckerberg's testimony in the Senate, you can clearly say the difference between just because you built a multi-million dollar or multi-billion dollar company doesn't make you a better human being or doesn't make you understand the human need better. You've just made some extra money. That's it. And that shows the difference between when you work with human beings and understand the dynamics, you are able to better decide or better suggest on how a technology should or shouldn't be. And like I said, blockchain is also hyped so much as if it's a futuristic integrative wand, and your data will suddenly magically be valid. No, human beings interact with these things. Anything a human being touches, opposite of King Midas, it can sometimes really be falling apart depending on who the human beings is. Even in our rice blockchain, I told you, people could lie that they're actually following the practices, or people can say, supposing we introduce a pesticide prevention measures, and people could still spray pesticides and record in the blockchain that they cannot, they're not doing it and get a token. Or in the case of uploading it in a land, the local elite can still fake things into the blockchain. That's why it's so important that before you put things in the blockchain, you do a proper user-centric design thinking process guided by people who know how to work with health sector, people who know how to work with human beings, and do an objective consensus with multiple parties, multiple stakeholders, multiple evaluation professionals. Then you decide what you should or shouldn't put in a blockchain. Because if you completely rely on it at the moment without having a parallel backup to validate it, then that becomes the new truth, and you cannot erase that. And that's why it's so important that the technologies, if you try to, after these workshops, after this seminar, if you say let's test this in this region, please make sure you have the right person guiding you, someone with integrity, at the same time someone who understands the objective of whatever task that you're trying to accomplish and understands who the users are. And that's why I'm saying these revolutionary technologies should be guided by human development experts and not purely by tech geeks. Um, that's why I said, as PQMD, you can look at what individual areas where you can start working on in your own sectors. I mean, I saw how diverse your partners are, your community of practices, and there's plenty of opportunities where you can test it. Especially emerging technologies needs lots of proof of concepts or small pilots and micro pilots that you need to do. And if you, any of you, or if your colleagues have the ability to do even a small pilot in a rural area in Indonesia or in the US or somewhere, and parallel to the regular processes, you try to test a blockchain option, you can always measure using a randomized control trial to see which one worked better and how much the efficiency introduced. And that is a great learning and a knowledge that you will be contributing to. If you recall the internet, it was the U.S. Army was using it from the 60s and 70s, but to us as regular folks, it was introduced in 1992. And then people were misunderstanding it. Nobody knew what was going on. It took the tech industry a lot of dot-com boom and bust before we started using it in development. But in this case, or even in the humanitarian and healthcare, in this case, we have this opportunity where we know a lot more about this technology compared to how we knew about internet when it first started. So this is a great opportunity to explore further. And then you can identify the challenges you have and build hackathons or host examples of how you can have a healthcare-based blockchain and things like that, and create that ecosystem for grow, and keep thinking about, as PQMD and or as individual organizations that are part of PQMD, what you can do to do that. I mean, that's what I said. You can invest in agile projects, meaning it doesn't have to be a linear project where you introduce something and measure it after 5 years, but continuously learn on the go, not only in terms of whether or not your project achieves its outcome, but documenting the processes of challenges that you do. Because more and more, at least us in evaluation and research, we are learning the importance of not just documenting whether A happened, B happened, but what happened from A to B in between, and what did we learn, where did we fail is equally important. So we recently had a workshop called Big Data, Blockchain, and Human-Centered Design for Development Programming in Jakarta. And we continue to host them around the world. And I'll be in DC speaking specifically about how monitoring and evaluation professionals can use blockchain for a 2-day workshop. And then, so you could do that. You could engage your governments, engage donors and policymakers, so you can help push the agenda rather than the technology pushing you, but you pushing the technology because you work closely ultimately to the end users. Sometimes when I say this in some communities, people think I'm crazy because I seem to put people before technology, and especially if you're in Silicon Valley or if you're giving lectures, they can't understand that phrase that human beings are more important than technology. I'm not sure how you are listening in, but at least in folks, the rest of us around the world, ultimate importance is the human being. And if any technology doesn't serve the needs of the least among us or of the people in need, and then there is no point for a technology to exist. At least some of us are tuned in that way, and especially in the development sector, in international development, and governments around the world, we tend to think of how do we harness this technology. So, and also be very careful with the snake oil sales folk that I find everywhere on people who try to push off things as blockchain. Because as you know, if you're following stock market, a company recently just added the word blockchain to itself, and its stock shot up by 20%. So, so they don't even know what is blockchain, but they keep using that. But as PQMD staff, I mean partners, this is a great opportunity, and I would recommend some of you at least to do a design thinking process to see how blockchain will fit in. This is a rushed up webinar, but I'm happy to answer individual questions right now, as well as my email is with Jen and Julie Marie, and I'm very happy to take questions. And if you're around in DC, happy to meet up. I'm there the next 10 days, starting from tomorrow. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I've put some resources here, additional resources. If they share with you, please have a look at this, and please shoot me a mail, and I think I'll stop talking now.
Well, wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Gandhi. You certainly have helped us to open a new perspective on potential solutions in development. It's been great to we appreciate your outlook and your efforts that you are doing to lead equitable and just use of new technologies to solve very complex problems. I realize we're running over, but I unmuted everybody, and I'd love to open it up to questions for anybody who might have a question. I'm seeing a question here asking if the PDF slides will be available. Yes, they will. We will post them on the community of practice, so you'll be able to access all the links that are embedded within them. I have another question that had come in asking, so we understand, would you be able to tell us a little bit about the Drones for Development project?
Oh, sure. It's the Drones for Development is not a blockchain project, but it's one of our, because we involve in technology for good, but certainly you can use that as a tool to add data within the blockchain, even in our RISE project. The Drones for Development project is where we provide a 360-degree assessment of a situation. For instance, there is a huge biodiversity loss that happens in certain parts of Southeast Asia as a result of not so nice practices by certain corporations. And there are NGOs that try to, or governments that try to measure the biodiversity loss. But quite often they have the ability to measure it either by visiting the fields or talking to the farmers in the traditional evaluation ways. But we do 360-degree training, 360-degree assessment. We look at objectively from the sky, from the drone, and map it in GIS. And then we also talk to the farmer, because the drones will do the objective assessment of how the biodiversity loss is, or how a land is used or not used. And then the farmer would give their subjective perception on why they think the biodiversity loss is happening, or any internal conflicts, or the situations that a drone cannot capture. So we combine these qualitative subjective data with the objective quantitative data, and we give an assessment to the local government or policymakers so they can decide on how to improve the biodiversity loss. That's one of the things. And then we also do certain urban mapping. We partner with Jakarta Smart City and a couple of other smart city around in Nairobi and also in Singapore. And we train their local staff on using drones to map and coupled with an open street map, which is an online open map to report crimes, report traffic, and things like that. So it's basically use of drones for urban city planning or rural development and international development.
Thank you. Okay, and one more question that's come in. It says, Dr. Gandhi, how do you envision blockchain technology shifting healthcare practices in developed versus developing or emerging economies? And can you envision a timeline for significant change?
IBM did a study on specifically this question, and then they said that the shift would happen somewhere around 2020 to 25, because traditionally, if you've heard of this phrase, diffusion of innovations, which is a bell curve where there'll be early adopters, and then people will start looking at the successes, and then people will start adopting if it's really successful. So that kind of a bell curve assessment IBM did, and they saw that by 2025, everybody in healthcare would shift to blockchain. But of course, IBM has their own interest on why they would say it, because they're highly promoting blockchain, and it's one of their core selling factors. But personally, for me, I think healthcare certainly will come into starting to use blockchains. Again, depending on the political will of private hospitals or public hospitals and the governments that govern them. Otherwise, being transparent, accountable may not sound like nice words to everyone. It may sound as yes, this is how it should be, egalitarian and all this, but we live in a very diverse earth, and people have their opinions on what is equality and what should be shared and what shouldn't be shared. And so if it's in the vested interest of a few, of course, there will be challenges. That's why we need to show the positives in terms of, even with the use of a blockchain in healthcare, it actually saves you more money by being open and transparent, as we consistently see in other economic policies, that if you open up the market and or if the trickle down doesn't work and the egalitarian doesn't work, we've seen it time and again, which is common sense for a lot of us in international development, but still many political will is missing, and which we see around the world. So that is the only challenge, I would say. Otherwise, like I said, even personally, it affects me having these multiple data sets in multiple hospitals. But if you have it in a blockchain which is shared and I'm able to access it everywhere, that's amazing for health industry. It will be a revolution.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to check. I'll just take maybe one more question if there's any more out there. I don't know. I hope you can talk. I have unmuted everybody and permitted you to talk. Okay. So they say, Oliver Wendell Holmes said that a mind stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions. So with that, we thank you very much for sharing your time and your experience with us today. Please don't forget, everybody, that Dr. Gandhi will be in DC from September 3rd through the 10th. If you have the opportunity to meet up and brainstorm anything that you've heard here today, or anything else as well. And lastly, PQMD is very happy to continue to bring you webinars. If you have ideas or areas of interest, please just reach out to us. And we look forward to your continued participation in the community of practice. Have a great day, and thank you very much for being a part of this.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening patiently.
Thank you, Dr. Gandhi.
Thank you very much.